Lad with the Goatskin. Long ago, a poor widow woman lived down near the iron forge by Enniscorth, and she was so poor she had no clothes to put on her son. So she used to fix him in the ash hole near the fire and pile the warm ashes about him, and according as he grew up, she sunk the pit deeper. At last, by hook or by crook, she got a goatskin and fastened it round his waist, and he felt quite grand and took a walk down the street. Says she to him next morning, "Tom, you thief, you never done any good yet, and you 6 foot high and past 19. Take that rope and bring me a bundle from the wood." "Never say it twice, mother," says Tom. "Here goes." When he had it gathered and tied, what should come up but a big giant, 9 foot high, and made a lick of a club at him. Well become Tom, he jumped to one side and picked up a rampike, and the first crack he gave the big fellow, he made him kiss the clod. "If you have e'er a prayer," says Tom, "now's the time to say it, before I make fragments of you." "I have no prayers," says the giant, "but if you spare my life, I'll give you that club, and as long as you keep from sin, you'll win every battle you ever fight with it." Tom made no bones about letting him off, and as soon as he got the club in his hands, he sat down on the Bresna, and gave it a tap with the Kippeen, and says, "I had great trouble gathering you, and run the risk of my life for you. The least you can do is carry me home." And sure enough, the wind of the word was all it wanted. It went off through the wood, groaning and crackling, till it came to the widow's door. Well, when the sticks were all burned, Tom was sent off again to pick more, and this time he had to fight with a giant that had 2 heads on him. Tom had a little more trouble with him, that's all, and the prayers he said was to give Tom a fife that nobody could help dancing when he was playing it. Begorries, he made the big man dance home with himself sitting on it. The next giant was a beautiful boy with 3 heads on him. He had neither prayers nor catechism. I love getting random vocabulary lessons, actually. Yeah, I like it. I like finding words that I have never heard before. There are a few words in here, though, that when I looked them up, it only gave me references to this specific book. So it's like the word just exists here. It's probably like spelled wrong or something, and it just like that particular spelling is only in this book. So there are things that I still don't know, but most of the time it's like something that's related to Irish like language, linguistics. The next giant was a beautiful boy with 3 heads on him. He had neither prayers nor catechism, no more than the others, and so he gave Tom a bottle of green ointment that wouldn't let you be burned, nor scalded, nor wounded. "And now," says he, "there's no more of us. You may come and gather sticks here till little lunacy day in harvest, without giant or fairy man to disturb you." Tom was prouder nor 10 peacocks, and used to take a walk down street in the heel of the evening, but some of the little boys had no more manners than if they were Dublin Jackeens, and put out their tongues at Tom's club and Tom's goatskin. He didn't like that at all, and it would be mean to give one of them a clout. At last, what should come through the town but a kind of bellman, only it's a big bugle he had, and a huntsman's cap on his head, and a kind of a painted shirt. So this, he wasn't a bellman, and I don't know what to call him, bugleman maybe, proclaimed that the King of Dublin's daughter was so melancholy that she didn't give a laugh for 7 years, and that her father would grant her in marriage to whoever could make her laugh 3 times. "That's the very thing for me to try," says Tom, and so, without burning any more daylight, he kissed his mother, curled his club at the little boys, and off he set along the Yalla high road to the town of Dublin. At last, Tom came to one of the city gates, and the guards laughed and cursed at him instead of letting him in. Tom stood it all for a little time, but at last one of them, out of fun, as he said, drove his bayonet 1/2 an inch or so into his side. Tom done nothing but take the fellow by the scruff of the neck and the waistband of his corduroys and fling him into the canal. Some run to pull the fellow out, and others to let manners into the vulgarian with their swords and daggers, but a tap from his club sent them headlong into the moat or down on the stones, and they were soon begging him to stay his hands. So at last one of them was glad enough to show Tom the way to the palace yard, and there was the king and the queen and the princess in a gallery, looking at all sorts of wrestling and sword-playing and long dances and mumming, all to please the princess, but not a smile came over her handsome face. Well, they all stopped when they seen the young giant with his boy's face and long black hair and his short curly beard, for his poor mother couldn't afford to buy razors, and his great strong arms and bare legs and no covering but the goatskin that reached from his waist to his knees. But an envious, wizened bit of a fellow with a red head that wished to be married to the princess and didn't like how she opened her eyes at Tom, came forward and asked his business very snappishly. "My business," says he, "is to make the beautiful princess, God bless her, laugh 3 times. "Do you see all them merry fellows and skilful swordsmen," says the other, "that could eat you up with a grain of salt, and not a mother's soul of 'em ever got a laugh from her these 7 years?" So the fellows gathered round Tom, and the bad man aggravated him till he told him he didn't care a pinch of snuff for the whole bilin' of them. Let 'em come on, 6 at a time, and try what they could do. The king, who was too far off to hear what they were saying, asked what did the stranger want. "He wants," says the red-headed fellow, "to make hares of your best men." "Oh," says the king, "if that's the way, let one of 'em turn out and try his mettle." So one stood forward, with sword and pot-lid, and made a cut at Tom. He struck the fellow's elbow with the club, and up and over their heads flew the sword, and down went the owner of it on the gravel from a thump he got on the helmet. Another took his place, and another, and then 6 at once, and Tom sent swords, helmets, shields, and bodies rolling over, and themselves bawling out that they were kilt, and disabled, and damaged, and rubbing their poor elbows and hips, and limping away. Tom contrived not to kill anyone, and the princess was so amused that she let out a great sweet laugh out of her that was heard over all the yard. "King of Dublin," says Tom, "I've courted your daughter." And the king didn't know whether he was glad or sorry, and all the blood in the princess's heart run into her cheeks. So there was no more fighting that day, and Tom was invited to dine with the royal family. Next day, Redhead told Tom of a wolf, the size of a yearling heifer, that used to be serenading about the walls and eating people and cattle, and said what a pleasure it would give the king to have it killed. "With all my heart," says Tom. "Send a Jackeen to show me where he lives, and we'll see how he behaves to a stranger." The princess was not well pleased, for Tom looked a different person with fine clothes and a nice green Birredh over his long curly hair, and besides, he'd got one laugh out of her. However, the king gave his consent, and in an hour and a half the horrible wolf was walking into the palace yard, and Tom a step or 2 behind, with his club on his shoulder, just as the shepherd would be walking after a pet lamb. The king and queen and princess were safe up in their gallery, but the officers and people of the court that were Pawdrowling about the great Bawn, when they saw the big baste coming in, gave themselves up and began to make for doors and gates, and the wolf licked his chops, as if he was saying, "Wouldn't I enjoy a breakfast off a couple of yous?" The king shouted out, "Oh, Tom, with the goatskin, take away that terrible wolf, and you must have all my daughter." But Tom didn't mind him a bit. He pulled out his flute and began to play like vengeance, and Dickens, a man or boy in the yard, but began shoveling away heel and toe, and the wolf himself was obliged to get on his hind legs and dance, Tatherjack Walsh along with the rest. A good deal of the people got inside and shut the doors, the way the hairy fellow wouldn't pin them. But Tom kept playing, and the outside kept dancing and shouting, and the wolf kept dancing and roaring with the pain in his legs were giving him, and all the time he had his eyes on Redhead, who was shut out along with the rest. Wherever Redhead went, the wolf followed, and kept one eye on him and the other on Tom, to see if he would give him leave to eat him. But Tom shook his head, and never stopped the tune, and Redhead never stopped dancing and bawling, and the wolf dancing and roaring, one leg up and the other down, and he ready to drop out of his standing from fair tiresomeness. When the princess seen that there was no fear of anyone being killed, she was so diverted by the stew that Redhead was in, that she gave another great laugh, and well become Tom, and out he cried, "King of Dublin, I have 2 halves of your daughter." "Oh, halves or alls," says the king, "put away that divil of a wolf, and we'll see about it." So Tom put his flute in his pocket, and says he to the baste, "Walk off to your mountain, my fine fellow, and live like a respectable baste. If ever I find you come within 7 miles of any town, I'll—" He said no more, but spit in his fist, and gave a flourish of his club. It was all the poor divil of a wolf wanted. He put his tail between his legs, and took to his pumps without looking at man or mortal, and neither sun, moon, or stars ever saw him in sight of Dublin again. At dinner, everyone laughed but the foxy fellow, and sure enough he was laying out how he'd settle poor Tom next day. Well, to be sure, says he, King of Dublin you are in luck. There's the Danes moidering us to no end. I think that's supposed to be murdering, but it's spelled moidering. I'm not going to look it up. I'm just going to assume. That can't go badly. Deuce run to Lusk with 'em, and if anyone can save us from 'em, it's this gentleman with the goatskin. There's a flail hanging on the collar beam in hell, and neither Dane nor devil can stand before it. So, says Tom to the king, will you let me have the other half of the princess if I bring you the flail? No, no, says the princess. I'd rather never be your wife than see you in that danger. But Redhead whispered and nudged Tom about how shabby it would look to renege the adventure. So he asked which way was he to go, and Redhead directed him. Well, he travelled and travelled till he came in sight of the walls of hell, and bedad, before he knocked at the gates, he rubbed himself over with the greenish ointment. When he knocked, 100 little imps popped their heads out through the bars, and asked him what he wanted. I want to speak to the big divil of all, says Tom. Open the gate. It wasn't long till the gate was thrown open, and the old boy received Tom with bows and scrapes, and axed his business. My business isn't much, says Tom. I only came for the loan of that flail that I see hanging on the collar beam, for the King of Dublin to give a thrashing to the Danes. Well, says the other, the Danes is much better customers to me, but since you walked so far, I won't refuse. Hand that flail, says he to a young imp, and he winked the far-off eye at the same time. So, while some were barring the gates, the young devil climbed up and took down the flail that had the handstaff and Booltheen both made out of red-hot iron. The little vagabond was grinning to think how it would burn the hands of Tom, but the dickens a burn it made on him, no more nor if it was a good oak sapling. Thank ye, says Tom. Now would you open the gate for a body, and I'll give you no more trouble. Oh, tramp, says old Nick, is that the way? It is easier getting inside them gates than getting out again. Take that tool from him, and give him a dose of the oil of stirrup. So one fellow put out his claws to seize on the flail, but Tom gave him such a welt of it on the side of the head that he broke off one of his horns, and made him roar like a devil as he was. Well, they rushed at Tom, but he gave them, little and big, such a thrashing as they didn't forget for a while. At last, says the old thief of all, rubbing his elbow, let the fool out, and woe to whoever lets him in again, great or small. So out marched Tom, and away with him, without minding the shouting and cursing they kept up at him from the top of the walls. And when he got home to the big bawn of the palace, there never was such running and racing as to see himself and the flail. When he had his story told, he laid down the flail on the stone steps, and bid no one for their lives to touch it. If the king and queen and princess made much of him before, they made 10 times more of him now. But Redhead, the mean scruff-hound, stole over and thought to catch hold of the flail to make an end of him. His fingers hardly touched it when he let a roar out of him as if heaven and earth were coming together, and kept flinging his arms about and dancing, that it was pitiful to look at him. Tom ran at him as soon as he could rise, caught his hands in his own too, and rubbed them this way and that, and the burning pain left them before you could reckon one. Well, the poor fellow, between the pain that was only just gone and the comfort he was in, had the comicalest face that you ever see. It was such a Oh boy, this is definitely an invented word. It was such a mixtherum-gatherum, hyphenated. It was such a mixtherum-gatherum of laughing and crying. Everybody burst out a-laughing. The princess could not stop no more than the rest. And then says Tom, Now, ma'am, if there were 50 halves of you, I hope you'll give me them all. Well, the princess looked at her father, and by my word, she came over to Tom and put her 2 delicate hands into his 2 rough ones, and I wish it was myself was in his shoes that day. Tom would not bring the flail into the palace. You may be sure no other body went near it, and when the early risers were passing the next morning, they found 2 long clefts in the stone where it was, after burning itself and opening downwards, nobody could tell how far. But a messenger came in at noon and said that the Danes were so frightened when they heard of the flail coming into Dublin that they got into their ships and sailed away. Well, I suppose before they were married, Tom got some man like Pat Mara of Tominine to learn him the principles of politeness, fluxions, gunnery, and fortification, decimal fractions, practice, and the rule of 3 direct, the way he'd able to keep up a conversation with the royal family. Whether he ever lost his time learning them sciences, I'm not sure, but it's as sure as fate that his mother never more saw any want till the end of her days. And that is the end of part 1 of Celtic Fairy Tales. I enjoyed that story. My voice didn't, but I liked that there were so many new words to look up. I liked the fight scene in that one too. It felt very campfire story. Yeah, it had kind of it had a little bit of a different feel to the other stories in the book, I think. For one thing, in a lot of the book, it seems like the different characters are written in a certain way that are supposed to sound a certain way, but the narrator tends to be more neutral. But in this one, I think the narrator was definitely had an accent, and I probably, if I had picked up on that earlier, I would have maybe given the narrator more of an accent. But I think that's why there were so many words that I needed to look up, is because they were written phonetically, like the paycock versus peacock. They were written phonetically, I think, to indicate an accent, and I didn't pick up on that right away. So I wanted it to have a little bit of consistency, so I didn't continue with, I didn't change it at all once I realized. But yeah, if I went back and did it again, I'd probably try and give the narrator a little bit of an accent and see if maybe that makes the words a little bit easier to come. That is one thing that I have not mastered in my writing yet, is writing with an accent, or writing things exactly the way that they're said. Part of it, I think, is because even though I write in a fictional world usually, I don't want it to feel like I'm sort of taking somebody's accent, or taking either appropriating an accent, or just being culturally blind and or racist about it. So part of me is I don't want to write it because I just don't want to risk it. But also I think I just haven't had the practice enough with it yet. So maybe it'll come eventually. These stories remind me a bit of a set of Costa Rican tales called Los Cuentos de Mi Tía Panchita, My Aunt Panchita's Tales, by Carmen Lyra. I'm going to look it up because I've been going to a lot of used bookstores and just finding things that are interesting. I had to hold myself back from spending too much money the other day at a used bookstore. It's very easy to overdo it too until it's just hard to read. I think Mark Twain was the last person to do it well. Yeah, I would say I kind of struggled a little bit with Mark Twain because of that, but also I was a kid, and so I might have just not known very well. Carmen Lyra. Sasha, do you know if there's a translation in English, or is it just a book in Spanish? Dialogue that feels natural and not contrived is so difficult to write. Yeah, I would agree. That it takes a lot. I find that I have to I write it and then I have to read it out loud so that I can hear if it's weird, and then I might have to edit a lot of it. Dialogue tends to come naturally to me, but it can still be a challenge to get it to flow. Lyra, okay. Yeah, I feel like if I'm the more into a story I am, the more I feel like I'm putting myself in the place of the character, the easier the dialogue comes because it feels more like me. But then the problem is I don't want all of the characters to sound like me, so I have to like then actively make a choice of like, okay, this person has to speak in this way. My first drafts are almost entirely dialogue. Interesting. Do you ever do like script writing? Because that's almost entirely dialogue usually, unless you've got like an action scene or something. I have written a few scripts, and I actually came up with one. Yeah, is it written more like a play? Yeah. I came up with an idea this past weekend because I went to a film festival and somebody said something. I don't remember what it was, but suddenly my brain was just like, "Oh, you're writing a thing now in your head," and I haven't had a chance to sit down and write it, like actually write it out yet. So I've been thinking about scripts and plays a lot more recently. I struggle with setting description. Like I can already see it in my head, so I just assume the reader is seeing what I see. Yeah, sometimes that's okay though. If you make the world, if you're so immersed in the world that it kind of like, yeah, you don't want to just leave them stranded. But sometimes if you're super immersed in the world and the characters are fully immersed in the world, it kind of draws the audience to like follow along with it in a way. But it's a balance. You still have to give them something usually. I agree. I try to only include the necessary details. Yeah. Kind of, yeah. Then I go in and fill in the details later. I have written a couple of plays, but nothing that was ever produced. Okay. Sometimes it's nice to just have the freedom of using that format. Just because it does sort of free you a little bit from having to do you know, like descriptions or the he said, she said, and then he said, and then that, like, you know, the back and forth. If you write it as a play or as a film script or something, you don't really have to do that. It's kind of the way it's formatted. So it can be freeing in some ways, but it definitely feels a little bit different to write prose compared to writing a script, or like even writing poetry is different as well. Do you guys write chronologically? I th- I think for the most part I do. Do you mean chronologically within the story, or do you mean like starting at the start and ending at the end? Because I do jump around a bit in that regard. If there's something that I'm stuck on, I'll just put like, now this happens, and then move on, and then I'll go back and flesh it out later because I don't want to just get stuck for too long on one part. So in that sense, I try to write chronologically by story beat, but not necessarily having everything fully fleshed out. I try to write chronologically, but sometimes I jump around as well. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to just write the thing that's like most pressing in your mind at the moment. I think jumping around is fine. Like if you're getting an idea out, I have to keep the momentum going. So if I get stuck, I just summarize a bunch of stuff happens and move on. Yeah, I have a script that I wrote during the pandemic, and it's mostly finished, except there's this one scene that's like, there's a fight scene here, and I don't know why. And I've just left it because I was like, I'll come back to it later, and then I never came back to it. I'm glad that I have in some way been able to join you for your studies. Sasha, I've only found versions in Spanish, but I found one called The Subversive Voice of Carmen Lyra Selected Works. Okay. I'll have to look into it. I don't speak Spanish, but I do recognize some words because I do speak a little bit of Italian, so some of the words are similar.
Hi there. Thanks for joining our book club. If you'd like to join the conversation, I would love it if you would leave us a comment. And if you'd like to see more, check out the playlist.